Good evening. Today we're going to be doing a first on this channel. We're going to be remixing a song that I helped produce. So that's fun. It's called Fantasy by Will Watt and Dara, and I'll link it in the description. So go and have a listen to the original. And also, here's the boys playing it in Belfast last week. Nice. All right, let's get into it.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be.
All right, let's listen from the top.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be. Living in your head, you will see. You try to stay away, but it's where you wanna be. Can't resist this fantasy. No matter what you say, you know I'll always be. Living in your head, you will see. You try to stay away, but it's where you wanna be. Can't resist this fantasy. No matter what you say, you know I'll always be. Living in your head, you will see. You try to stay away, but it's where you wanna be. Can't resist this fantasy.
Lovely, let's run through it. So there's a lot going on in this song, and actually if I would spend a little bit more time on it, I'd probably end up taking some bits away, because there are some sections where there's a lot going on and you can't hear things particularly clearly. So actually one of the things when progressing a song that is very important is knowing when to take things away. So we are in E minor, and we've got two main chord progressions throughout the song. So the first one is E to G to C, and then we go down to the B at this last little section here. And I'm just using these chords, which are Pluck Alive, which are in the factory presets, Pluck Alive. I use it quite a lot. It's one of my favorite plucks. We got some delay on there, a bit of compression. And we've got these triads, so the first, the third, and the fifth, and then we've put the thirds up an octave. And you can see they're not totally on grid. I've pushed them a little bit before the beat, so it gives it like a bit of a rushed feel. Just doesn't sound so robotic.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be. Living in your head, you will see. You try to stay away, but it's where you wanna be. Can't resist this fantasy.
And then our second progression is the E to the D to the C to the B. So we're just changing this second chord from the G. This time round, we're doing it as a D. So in this intro, we've got these sort of vocal chop things going on. So I've got two vocal samples panned left and right. So they're sort of acting as a bit of a choir. So we just have that in the background. And then we put them into a sampler, and we put the glide on portamento, and it's at 50 seconds. So that's what gives it that nice glide in between those notes. And throughout the whole song, I've automated these chords. So we're changing the frequency of the cutoff, and we're also changing the decay. Throughout the whole song, these chords aren't static. They have a movement and a bit of a journey, depending on where they are in the song.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be. Living in your head, you will see.
So in this section, we introduced some guitars. So I'm using Contact for this, strummed acoustic. I'll bounce them out just in case you don't have Contact. But they're literally just following the chords, and it just helps to bring a little bit of a more organic feel to the song. And we just introduced this Reese, which is doing the root notes of these chords, and it's very simple, just a couple of saw waves, fine-tuned, up 10, down 10, bit of a filter on there, got a bit of resonance to make it sound a little bit more interesting, and that's pretty much it. And then we just introduced this break that I've cut up quite a lot. And instead of these held choir notes that we have in the intro, doing a little bit of a rhythm with these. And a little bit of a melody, so it sort of is going along with the vocal a little bit, so they're not clashing too much.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be living in your head. You will see, you try to stay away, but it's where you wanna.
So it's not exactly the same, but it kind of follows that kind of cadence, so it doesn't sound weird when they're next to each other. And then in this section, we've just got this pad, which is just a couple of saw waves. Just fills it out a little bit.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be living in your head. You will see, you try to stay away, but it's where you wanna be. Can't resist this fantasy.
And this next section, we're bringing back this same choir kind of sound, but this time I put a trance gate on it, so it gives it that stuttery effect. So it's building up that energy rhythmically as we're going into that drop. And one thing to make the chords in this build a little bit more interesting, I've added these little flicks in there, so it has a little bit more of a melody. So instead of just those straight chords, we go the din 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 din. And the first time round, because these are the higher notes, these are the notes that the ear tends to pick up. And because we're running down that top line down to here, it feels like our ears lend itself to listening to this part of the chord rather than the top one again. So what I've done is I've taken the velocity of those top ones down just a tiny, tiny bit, so the ear can actually hear this whole run at the higher end of the chord, because that's how our ears normally perceive a melody. And because we run down here and I've softened these top notes, it almost feels like your ear follows all the way down here. So it's an interesting way of messing with the perception of these chords. So the way that we've done it there, instead of the melody that you pick up being this, subconsciously it feels like the melody the ear gravitates to is this one. So we've not actually made any changes to the actual structure of the chord. It's just the way that we've led the listener's ear from up here to down here. So it makes it a little bit more interesting. So it sounds like there's more of an evolution than there actually is, but it's just a little weird way of playing with perception. And to help build, we've got a couple of snare risers. And I've made sure that all these velocities are slightly different, because if they're all the same, it sounds really weird and unnatural. So just changing these velocities slightly as they go on makes it sound a little bit more natural. And we've just got another one on top of that. A little bit marching band kind of sound. And then we have our crashes interspersed and then gaining in rhythm as we go up to the drop, and our kicks are doing the same thing up here as well. Just as we introduce that drop, we've got a little bit of a fake drop. Just because that vocal is so strong, it's a really impactful way to just come in with no drums. So you really just hear that vocal with a little bit of these chords just together, and then the impact when all those drums come back in is a lot stronger.
No matter what you say, you know I'll always be living in your head.
And then just before those drums kick back in, we've got this little pause. So we've taken the chords out and we hit the snare. So there's a little bit more of a gap in this little section, and then everything kicks in here.
You know I'll always be living in your head. You will see, you try to stay away, but it's where you wanna be. Can't resist this.
So very simple with the drums. We've got a kick, our snares. We've got our shuffles and hats and ghost perks. And then I've got a top loop on top of that. And then as we come into the second section, I just add a few shakers. So with our basses, we have got our sub. I put that outside of the bass group just so I had a little bit more control over it. This is just a sine wave. And what you can do is you can go into this little pencil button here and you can add some harmonics to it. So this is our fundamental harmonic here. So if we just listen to that by itself, it's very subby, very low endy. And then we can just introduce this second harmonic. And it just adds a little bit more on top. So you can just hear the clarity a little bit better. So just a tickle of that second harmonic really helps that sub to push through a little bit. And I've got a little bit of an overdrive on there, which is doing a similar thing. Just add in some harmonics on top, just so it helps punch through a little bit. And I initially started off doing this as a very down the line dimension song, but it sort of evolved a little bit away from that, but we've still got the fundamentals of the kind of thing that he would do. So we've got this chunk, 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 chunk bass. And then I'm just using this mid bass on top, which is the mid bass I made for the Kisses remix I did. It's just a MSPW, analog BD sign. And then our envelope 2 is affecting this cutoff. And then we've got a little bit of distortion on there, a little bit of compression, and that's it. And to add that sort of 7th semitone vibe, I've put in this M1. So it's just the M1 organ, just on the offbeat. And then I've got a bit of redux on there to crisp it up a little bit, because without that redux, it's a little bit flat. So it just adds that sparkle on top of it, tiny bit of delay, and that is literally it. We've also got a fake sidechain set up. So up here, we have a sidechain trigger that's not audible, so I've got it turned off. And we're sidechaining the bass to that trigger. So you get more of the offbeat. So rather than it being dun 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 dun, it's more dun 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 dun. So without it, and with, just a subtle difference, just stucks out that first note and accentuates the offbeat. And something interesting that I wanted to touch on is what I've done with these chords is everything is in key, everything's in E minor apart from this last note at the end here. So this D sharp. So this is our minor 7th, which is the D. And so if we listen to that, it sounds very natural in this context. And then this last one is a major 7th, so it gives it a little bit more tension. There's a nice resolve that you wouldn't necessarily choose if you were keeping to the key. So it's a good idea, especially with the 7th, to sometimes just try the major 7th instead of the minor 7th, because you don't always have to stick so religiously to a key, because who needs rules, man? Let's smoke a doobie. Yeah. And then on this post section where the vocals do the da 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 da, I've just used these chops to mimic that, so it just feels like there's a bit more of a sort of gang vocal going on. So because there's a few elements that are copying that one melody, it makes it feel a little bit more epic. And there we have it. Fantasy, what a banger. Do go listen to it on Spotify. And I do hope this has helped. And please do subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. And love to your mum.